It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Welcome into August 24th. It is 7 p.m. in the PM, I guess, as it were, here on the Better Sports Network. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and very, very happy to be coming to you tonight, talking fantasy football. It's the unofficial draft weekend, which is coming up this weekend. I'm sure there's a lot of people drafting tonight. There's going to be a ton of people drafting this weekend as well. And if you're looking for some more action, don't forget that you can win a pair of $1 million grand prizes at the FFPC at myffpc.com. The FFPC Main Event, a $1 million grand prize. The Fantasy Pros Championship, a $1 million grand prize, and just $350 to enter that one as well. You can also play fantasy football year-round with Dynasty Leagues at myffpc.com. 1,500 plus leagues and counting. More than a decade we've been doing this. None have ever folded. A shout out to our producer, Anthony Rivera, and a special shout out for tonight's guest co-host for the next 2 hours. You follow him on Twitter at Ryan Reynolds NFL. He is a member of the 33rd team. You follow them. Fantasy and Betting, in charge of fantasy and betting at the 33rd team. FB on X. I got to get used to X as opposed to Twitter. Still getting there. And, of course, a contributor to Establish the Run as well. Ryan Reynolds, welcome in, man.
How you doing, Eric? As you guys can see, I'm not the guy from TV's Deadpool, but hopefully I can give you some useful insights tonight.
Right, exactly. What's funny is for one of my local shows I'm in Northeast Wisconsin, and one of my shows yesterday, I interviewed Adam Carolla, comedian, actor, author, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I told my buddy about that, and he's like, "Wow, that's awesome." I'm like, "Yeah, and guess who I got on the Better Sports Network tonight? Ryan Reynolds." And he's like, "How are you getting these guys?" Like, probably not the Ryan Reynolds you're thinking of, right. The Ryan Reynolds that is much more well-versed in fantasy football here. Yes. So I want to ask you, I don't know how many drafts you've been doing, how engrossed you are in, but here we are, August 24th, less than 3 weeks till the start of the season. How's drafting season been going for you, Ryan?
I'm a maniac. I've done 500 best ball drafts so far, so I'm pretty deep into things. Season-long drafts are starting to roll around. I actually have a main event draft tonight on FFPC, so, getting more into the season-long swing of things right now.
Let's kick off Fantasy Football Night in America here on the Better Sports Network. This is not on the rundown I sent you, but, as you know, Ryan, just because we prepare a show doesn't mean the NFL news stops, and True. It didn't stop today. There is news from Ian Rappaport from the NFL Network saying that Broncos wide receiver Jerry Jeudy is expected to miss several weeks. Now, Rappaport classified Jeudy's hamstring injury as moderate, and he may or may not play week 1. There's optimism in Denver that it's nothing long-term in regards to maybe a huge chunk of the season or the entire season. Obviously, this is good news for Cortland Sutton. It's good news for Marvin Mims. We'll get to them in a second. But my question to you is, first off, and I know you're drafting an FFPC main event tonight too, which I think is compelling because you guys probably had to pivot a little bit, or maybe you didn't have to pivot. I don't know how you feel about Jerry Jeudy. But before the news of this, over the last 3 days in the FFPC main event, Jerry Jeudy's ADP was sitting at wide receiver 19 at the 403. Yeah. How far do you think it's going to plummet now, Ryan? And is that spot a spot you're still comfortable drafting Jeudy, knowing what we know now, which is not a ton?
I mean, I was actually targeting him at 4.03 in that kind of range. So this is especially disappointing news for me. I could see him getting into the 6th. Maybe it will take longer than a day for that, but people tend to, panic a little bit on injuries. And the truth is, with a hamstring in particular, even if they're moderate, they can linger for a while. So I'm expecting him to go around maybe the late 5th, early 6th tonight, potentially.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if he falls quite that far, but he might. There's a real possibility. Okay. Let's say, I don't even know, what spot are you guys drafting tonight?
1.01.
Oh, yeah, you get the first overall pick. Okay. So let's say it comes back to you in I guess he probably wouldn't come back to you. You probably have to take him in the early 5th if you wanted him And is that a spot that you'd be comfortable taking the discount, or is that still too early?
No, I mean, it all depends on on who else is available. But, especially with a big tournament like this, and I'm a tournament guy. I love tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
Week 1 matters much less than week 15, week 14, so on and so forth. So depending on our roster construction, I could at least be talked into taking him at the 4-5 turn.
And I think that obviously for you guys, that's where he's going to have to go. Let's move on from Judy and talk about Cortland Sutton, the Harry Snowman already chiming in, which in the YouTube chat right now, there's a lot of people that are going to be very excited about Cortland Sutton, right? And he says, looking for Cortland Sutton to show you something different than he has in the last 4 years is like Charlie Brown expecting Lucy to hold the ball this time.
Sure.
And while that's funny on the surface, right? Probably some truth to that as well.
Sure.
Cortland Sutton, I know there were some people out there that are a fan of his this year, but I think they're more of a fan of his ADP rather than the talent and the potential production. Cortland Sutton, wide receiver 46 at the 901 before this injury news. How far do you expect him to move up? Is he a guy that can sneak into the 7th round? Where would you be comfortable taking him? Again, knowing that if you're drafting him prior to the 901, it's based basically on either you liking Sutton or a reaction to the Jerry Jeudy injury, which the details are a little bit nebulous yet.
Yeah, I think maybe up to a round, maybe half a round's more likely, at least in the short term. I'd probably be on the fence at taking him. Again, it would depend on roster construction, and best ball him around even on him. So he's not exactly a guy I'm looking to target in a season-long tournament where I'm only going to do 2 or 3 entries versus, hundreds of them. So probably still more of a pass than a target for me at this point.
What about the other guy? And this is Harry Snowman also saying Mims season is on. And I know, Ryan, let's talk about Marvin Mims here prior to the Jeudy injury, how you felt about him, knowing what Denver did to get him. Sean Payton's essentially his first ever draft pick, trades up and gets Marvin Mims. What did you think about Mims when Jeudy was healthy? And what do you think about him now? His ADP, wide receiver 59 at the 1309.
The reason why I was interested in late round flyers on Mims is because one of potentially Russell Wilson's primary talent is extending plays and throwing the ball downfield. Mims' skill set matches up pretty well with that. So we could see more volume now if Jeudy misses time, obviously, but I think he was already on my radar and a guy I was overweight on in best ball. And in season long now, he's a guy I could see jumping around or two now. And even if he does, I'm still at least going to consider him when his time's up,
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people that are, I'm telling you, there were a lot of people in the pre-draft process, pre-NFL draft process. And then obviously after he was drafted by Denver, before, drafting really picked up in May and June. There was a lot of people, smart people, high stakes players I know that love Mims and continue to love Mims, and they're probably going to even love him more right now. Yeah. This is something that we're going to be looking at over the course. Drafting this weekend is going to be fascinating to see where Jeudy goes, to see where Mims and Sutton go, and the fallout from that. Let's get to a question in the YouTube chat right away. John H. Says that he drafted Jamar Chase at number 4 overall. He's looking at his second pick, and he looks at all the players that are available. He likes T. Higgins better than any other option in this 12-team PPR format. Would you go elsewhere, even though that this is his top player? Thank you, John. We appreciate it. My thoughts, and Ryan, I'll let you get into this. I'm not scared of loading up on a certain team, especially a team that should be as elite, an offense that should be as elite as the Bengals are going to be this year. So if I start off with my draft, Chase, Higgins, 12 teams PPR, I think that's fine. And if he is your top player, the second round is not a spot where you start posturing and trying to be cute. Get your best players, get your guys, which is, I've always said that for years. I have no problem with taking Higgins here, even though he already has Chase at the 104.
I mean, first of all, congratulations on getting Jamar Chase at 1.04. That's a pretty good deal on its own. With Higgins in the second round, backing him up, I'm totally comfortable, like you said, stacking Jamar Chase and Higgins up, and then you go and try to get Burrow around round 4, round 5 potentially. If he's the top guy on your list, yeah, like you said, I'm good with it. He probably wouldn't be the top guy on my list at that point in the draft. So I'd be potentially looking elsewhere, but I wouldn't go out of my way to talk you out of it either.
Yeah, and I think, and Lee Snyder pointing out, you might be able to get him in round 3, and that's true. But if T. Higgins is the best player out there, I don't know what these other, who these other players were that went off the board prior to that. Maybe I don't like them.
Right.
Maybe I liked all those players that went off the board, and Higgins is my top guy too. As far as like if you're playing in like a national tournament, like the main event in the FFPC or the Fantasy Pros Championship, at the FFPC best ball tournaments, obviously, stacking can be a very good thing, especially when you come to those money weeks. Even if this is a closed 12-team league and you're just trying to beat 11 other owners, yeah, I'll go to battle with Chase and Higgins. I wouldn't overthink this. If he's your top guy, go and get your top guy. All right, let's move on here and talk about there's a few trades. I don't think I have this on the rundown either. This is great, Ryan. The first time we've ever done a show, we're 10 minutes in, and I've talked about nothing that's been on the rundown so far.
I like it.
This is what we do. This is what we do. It's craziness.
I like it.
Adam Schefter is reporting that Washington wide receiver Terry McLaurin is uncertain for the regular season opener against Arizona. This is a sprained toe that Schefter says is typically a multiple week injury. Week 1 is 19 days away. The week 1 game for the Commanders is 19 days away from right now. This is sort of like a healthy 3-week timetable for McLaurin. If he's not able to go week 1, obviously Dotson is a big play. But if this is turf toe, we know toe injuries. You talked about the hamstring lingering. My God, the turf toe. Yeah. That is a big-time lingerer as well. So I look at this situation now, and let me give you the ADPs on both McLaurin and Dotson in the FFPC main event. McLaurin, wide receiver 27 at the 5'11", Jahan Dotson 703. Now, and that's wide receiver 27 and wide receiver 34 respectively. I have had a lot of smart people talk my ear off about Jahan Dotson over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. In fact, it might even increase right now. Given the McLaurin injury, how do you treat both of these guys in the FFPC main event? Where would you be looking at? Would you be looking at either of these guys when you're drafting in a few hours?
Yeah, McLaurin wasn't particularly a target of mine this year, but 5'11" is a reasonable price now. That said, especially like you said, if it's turf toe, that's a bit of a disaster if you take him that spot. I wasn't an FFPC draft, but I did a draft a couple of nights ago where McLaurin and Jahan Dotson went back to back. So I could, in a high stakes tournament like tonight, I could see that happening where they both go in the middle of the 6th. And right now, I'd give Dotson the slight edge between the two of them.
And Harry Snowman saying, is it a turf toe or slight fracture? Quite frankly, I don't know. Right. And I say turf toe because I've seen other people say this is similar to a turf toe injury. Sprained toe is the official nomenclature that has been reported for McLaurin v. Dotson. This is another good question tonight too, and I don't want you to, you don't have to give anything away, but Dominic Gazzetti on the YouTube chat says he has the 101 in his Fantasy Pros Championship, basically a carbon copy of the FFPC main event. He's leaning towards Kelsey. Ryan, as a guy who is also drafting at the 101 in the FFPC format tonight, would you say Travis Kelsey is a strong and good choice there?
I don't think he's bad in tight end premium, but what I'll say is if he was 30 years old instead of 34, I'd be more willing to pull the trigger. Eventually, time's going to catch up to this guy. I don't want to exactly bet against him. Don't exactly want to spend the first overall pick on him either in this situation.
And Dom has a follow-up to that. If Mahomes falls to the 212, if he does take Kelsey at the 101, if Mahomes falls to the 212, and I've seen it happen a bunch. I've seen it happen. There's a ton of Kelsey Mahomes stacks out there this year. Is it too risky to grab him because he's sacrificing running back and receiver positions? Or should he grab a quarterback later? My thoughts on this. I think there is value to Kelsey and Mahomes, even with all these stacks out there. But I don't think that it's the perceived value that you might have of how great it is to have the Mahomes-Kelsey stack because there has been so many of them already. You can build up running backs and receivers later. Again, in the FFPC, you only have to start 2 running backs, only have to start 2 receivers. You can flex out 2 other players. You could start 3 tight ends if you wanted to. I'm fine with grabbing a quarterback later. I mean, even if you skip out on Mahomes and you want an elite quarterback, coming back to you in the 4th round, and I should bring up the ADP on this before I speak out of turn. But let's say you don't go Mahomes there, and you want to do a quarterback coming back to you at the the 412 or the 501, that area there. You could still get a guy like Justin Herbert. I mean, Joe Burrow, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, those guys aren't the elite of the elite, but they're in the top tier. So I think that I'd be fine waiting on quarterback. I would have no problem if you wanted to do the Mahomes stack here with Kelsey. I just would say that when it comes down to those money weeks, Dom, and you see, oh my God, I thought this team was awesome with this Kelsey Mahomes stack. Well, there's a bunch of them out there. Your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, you're right. You're not going to be different with that. I'll come at it from two angles. In general, I'd rather take a quarterback at the 4 or 5 out of that group you're talking about, and
Mhm.
get another elite receiver, get an anchor running back, something to that effect. That said, if you're taking Kelsey first overall, you're kind of already all in on him to a degree. Where if Kelsey fails, your team's in trouble to begin with. Now, last year we saw that Patrick Mahomes doesn't really need a great supporting cast of wide receivers to win an MVP. So
Mhm.
I think I'd lean towards sure, that's fine, but I wouldn't be married to the concept in this particular instance.
Speaking of other guys that are questionable for week one, other receivers, let's go to Seattle with Jackson Smith-Njigba. Ian Rappaport saying that he's actually a long shot for week one against the Rams, which is okay for season long. We'll deal with it. It's going to be about a month. He had wrist surgery on Tuesday, so 2 days ago. He injured his wrist in the preseason game against the Dallas Cowboys on a catch and run that he almost scored a touchdown on. Obviously, this is good news for Lockett and Metcalf early in the season. But, there's a lot of people who are on Smith-Njigba. Now, should they be off of him at this point, Ryan? Should we be looking elsewhere when Smith-Njigba's ADP comes up, when we're looking at him as wide receiver 33 at the 702? He has dipped already over the last couple of days. The earliest he's gone has been 5-12. We've seen him fall to the end of the 7th round. What do you think the sweet spot is for Smith-Njigba, and how much time do you think he misses? Basically, not how much time you think he's going to miss. What's the draft strategy for you based on the time that you think he could potentially miss? I'll phrase it that way.
A lot of good questions there. If the report's accurate, where like maybe he misses 3 or 4 weeks and the Seattle goes in their bye and then he comes back. When you're drafting a rookie wide receiver in general, you're looking for them to peak in the second half of the season anyway. So in a tournament like this, I'd still be interested. I'd be interested in buying the dip. You said he's made it to the end of the 7th round. I was thinking more like early 8th potentially, or late 7th, mid 7th is when I'd start thinking about him. I know in DraftKings Best Ball PPR, I'm like grossly overweight on JSN, so I'm interested in him in general. Now, I'll also throw this wrinkle in there. At the 33rd team, we have a doctor, Doc Flynn. Doc Flynn said where he could have potentially broken his wrist, it could take longer than reports or surfacing. So I'm a little bit concerned with Eric because she's not a hype doctor. She only speaks if she has a pretty good angle on something. So I could see it being a little longer. They're probably going to be cautious with him too. But that said, I'm good with taking him, stuffing him in the flex late in the year, because that's what I'd be drafting him for anyway. But I wouldn't be I definitely wouldn't take him in the 5th round now.
Harry Snowman chiming in. Seattle has their bye week 5, right. Given Pete Carroll's history with being cautious with injury. Maybe week 6 is the earliest we see him. Yeah. There's a non-zero chance of that. Yeah. Knowing that, with everything you just said about Smith-Njigba, does that do anything to your rankings or your valuation on DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett?
No, that's what I was already thinking, that I knew his bye week was early and that they, it would make sense if they held him through that. So, yeah, I mean, still the 8th round, I think, is reasonable. If you can get him beyond that, that's wonderful. But that's pretty much what I'm banking on, is misses the first 5 weeks.
Okay. And that's fine. Like, and we're looking at Metcalf right now as a 309 pick. We're looking at Tyler Lockett at the 610. So obviously bump those guys up a little bit in the ADP, because that's probably going to happen. Yeah. Maybe significantly. This is so weird because we're heading into one of the biggest draft weekends of the year, and all of a sudden we have all these question marks with Jonathan Taylor, which you're going to get into in the second segment, and then obviously you're looking at players like the ones we've already discussed, McLaurin and Judy and Smith-Njigba, where there's so much up in the air with those guys. Art Stapleton, who covers the Giants for NorthJersey.com, said that Giants coaches were pleased with Jalen Hyatt's development this summer. Now, that's all fine and good, but what we want to talk about here is not only Hyatt, but Darren Waller as well. Darren Waller, a darling in FFPC tight end premium leagues, a guy who is almost leapfrogged. In fact, I should check it right now to see if he actually did leapfrog TJ Hawkinson as the tight end 3. I don't think he has yet, but man, is he breathing down Hawkinson's neck. He's about 3 picks behind right now. And I bring up the Jalen Hyatt thing because I don't know how you felt about him, coming out of Tennessee. I was a little bit nervous about the offense that he played in and how that translates to NFL success. I was a little bit nervous about him being able to run the full route tree right away, and the fact that they have so many other middling options that Hyatt could kind of fade into mediocrity, at least for year 1, before he breaks out in year 2. The fact that they have a target hog both at running back and tight end in Barkley and Waller, I think that hurts his prospects as well. Yet it seems like the coaches are pretty happy. And I know the reports, from the beat writers have been pretty positive about the plays that Hyatt's been making so far this year. Wide receiver 67. We'll talk about Hyatt first. Wide receiver 67 at the 14-11, Ryan. Is he worth a dart throw there? I mean, is there a certain amount of upside where if you're a volume drafter that you want to have some good exposure to Hyatt?
Yeah, I think that's a touch early still, but let me map out how I see the Giants' entire wide receiver room. They've made a very clear effort to stack speed this year. Paris Campbell, they brought Darius Slayton back, Jalen Hyatt in the draft. All those guys have pretty high-end speed. My original stance was I assumed Slayton would take the bulk of the work early in the year in that kind of role, where Hyatt would be his direct competition and maybe carve out a bigger role later in the year. But like you said, he had a good August. Maybe that timeline's accelerated a little bit. So I do want some of Hyatt, especially in tournaments, especially with the Giants playing the Rams in week 17. That's a pretty big high upside situation there. The Rams secondary is littered with no-name guys. So yeah. I do have some interest, but I'm not sure I'm pulling the trigger in the 14th round. Again, it depends on who's around.
And makes perfect sense. Yeah. But let me ask you this. This is a philosophical question here, Ryan. Okay. When we talk about these receivers not breaking out, but really kind of reaching a crescendo during the money weeks of their rookie seasons, is it actually smart to take some stabs on these rookie receivers late because of the potential payoff that, man, this guy could help me win $1 million or $200,000 or whatever it is, because you kind of put up with them and deal with them till they come into their own. But if you get a bunch of these guys clicking in those money weeks, that could be a huge payday.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is absolutely, especially with a guy like Hyatt, where you're not paying a premium on him. You're not drafting him to start him early in the year. He's a let's see what happens. You always have the freedom to drop him if things aren't trending in the right direction. Like Sky Moore, for instance, last year. Sky Moore went earlier than Hyatt, but I know I had a team with Gary Hartman and Cody Main, who I'm drafting with tonight, where we had Mahomes, so we tried to get every piece we could with the Chiefs. We held on to Moore probably too long, just in case he broke out during money season, like you said. So yes, I think Hyatt fits that bill, especially if Slayton gets hurt, for instance. Hyatt could be thrust into that role. He played primarily in the slot in college, so we can see reps in that area too. So my answer is yes. Hyatt's an upside swing that's worth taking in a tournament.
What about Lee Snyder actually just chimed in? Wan'Dale Robinson, are we out on him? I know they were excited about him last year, but we haven't heard much about him this year.
Yeah, I mean, the injury, I think it happened in November, if memory serves. So yeah, it seemed like, they brought in Campbell, Jamison Crowder, even Cole Beasley. So it seems like they brought in a number of veterans to fill that role, and maybe next year's Wan'Dale's year. So if you're taking him, know what you're getting into. He might not play all year, and even when he does, maybe it looks like Jamison Williams' role last year, limited. So yeah, only late, and I'd have low expectations.
I would throw in Jaden Reed as not the Harry Snowman. Dom Gazzetti is also chiming in as a good late round rookie receiver here too. Definitely a player that I don't necessarily think that. I think Christian Watson's going too early. I don't doubt his talent, but he's going too early in drafts. I think Romeo Doubs is going too late, and I think Jaden Reed it's the Goldilocks thing, right? Yeah. Oh, this bowl is too big. This bowl is too small or hot. This bowl is too cold. This bowl is just right. Jaden Reed is kind of just right for me right now, but Doubs I think is being undervalued too. So I'll be drafting him a bunch this weekend for sure. The Athletics, Diana Rossini. God, that's so weird to say after being at ESPN for forever. She and Alec Lewis, who actually covers the Giants for the Athletic or the Vikings for the Athletic, said that TJ Hockenson and the Vikings are far apart on a contract extension. Why I bring this up is because of the premium you have to pay if you want to draft TJ Hockenson right now. In the FFPC main event, middle of the third round, 305 as tight end 3 for now. Darren Waller hasn't passed him. I said I was on SiriusXM today, and I said I think there's a good chance that Waller passes Hockenson by the end of this weekend. Here's the issue for me. The contract thing is looming, right? But he's had this ear infection, and he's had this back issue or whatever. I don't know if those are made up things, like he's holding in or something. Yeah. I know that Hockenson has kind of refuted that, but it's hard for me to take players at their word nowadays, especially when it comes to injuries. Sure. But there are warts here. There are warts with Hockenson. Crushed it last season. Is the juice worth the squeeze here in the mid-third round for you in the FFPC main event?
Let me frame it to you this way, man. I write up every game during the season, and one of the primary stats that stood out to me, still to this day, was T.J. Hawkinson's usage of Minnesota was outrageous. It was Travis Kelce-like. Now, maybe the addition of Jordan Addison cuts into that a little bit. Wouldn't be a surprise at all, but in a tight end premium format in a tournament, especially, Hawkinson doesn't have the wonderful ceiling, which is why I like your Waller take. Waller probably has a better ceiling than Hawkinson, but Hawkinson's kind of tailor-made for this format if his usage can stay the same. We're probably going to consider him at 3.01. I hope we don't take him because I prefer to wait on tight end, but I think it's at least a conversation worth having in this kind of format.
What about so as far as like the contract, the back, the ear infection, like you're kind of, I don't want to say you're fading that, but that's more noise to you?
Just the way things are now, 10 years ago, I'd be afraid that he'd hold out. It's harder to hold out now. But yeah, I mean, if he's nicked up, maybe he sits out a few games. And I could also see, especially after the usage he had last year, I understand why he's trying to get paid right now. That makes sense to me too. So yeah, maybe like a very mild downtick where like his floor is a little less safe than it was a week ago, but not a major one.
Yeah, and Harry Snowman pointing out this is Hawkinson's final year of his contract too. So obviously a big year for him. He wants to get it done.
Yeah.
Let's go back to let's go to New Orleans. Catherine Terrell covers the Saints for ESPN.com, said that Juwan Johnson has been one of Derek Carr's most reliable targets this year. You think about New Orleans, you think about Chris Olave, Michael Thomas to a certain extent as well. Alvin Kamara, obviously the running backs there. We'll get into the Saints offense much more, but let's focus on Juwan Johnson here, Ryan. Tight end 16 at the 1109. He's going behind guys like Higbee and Okonkwo. He's going ahead of guys like Kmet, Everett, and Musgrave. This is a guy that I kind of was like, man, I should be earlier, a couple of months ago, I was like, I should be drafting more of this guy this year. And then I kind of faded him a little bit, not for any particular reason. Then they signed Jimmy Graham, which I don't really think that Jimmy Graham is any kind of threat to Juwan Johnson production. It's just weird that the Saints would go out and get a guy like Graham when they already had Johnson. And I don't know of any other injuries, with that Saints tight end room. I know Troutman is obviously in Denver now, but I don't know. Like Juwan Johnson, to me, I think I'm warming back up to him. I don't have to draft him as my starter. Certainly, if you go tight end heavy and you get one of the top guys, and then maybe you grab a Kincaid or an Njoku, and if you really want to hit it hard, you could get Juwan Johnson again at the 11-12 turn. I don't know if necessarily that's something you want to do, but I know people are going to do it. But what about Juwan Johnson for you as tight end 16?
In best ball, I'm pretty much significantly overweight on him. Let me come at you with this with two angles. One, if Michael Thomas has played 10 games in 3 years, he looks good right now. Everything's pointing in the right direction. But if he misses time again, I think Juwan Johnson's the primary beneficiary. And two, Darren Waller's an athletic tight end. He had some pretty good years with Derek Carr. I don't think Juwan Johnson's quite Darren Waller, but he's worth a flyer for me. And in the FFPC, if we wait on tight end, he's definitely one of the guys on my radar. I'd love to pair him with Kincaid, who's another high upside guy, because we're trying to win this thing at the end of the day. So what's the list of names of tight ends that can pop off and be a top 5 performer at the position? I think he at least has a path to that.
Andrew Cooper from Fantasy Alarm was the guest on the show last week, and he said, every single year there always is this tight end that's drafted outside the top 12 that turns in a top 5 season randomly out of nowhere. Robert Tonyan, I think about a couple of years ago. He was one of them. And Juwan Johnson definitely could be that guy. Tight end drafting philosophy for you in the main event, in just tight end premium scoring in general. Do you usually find yourself feeling like the elite tight ends are a little bit overvalued and you're actually better off team construction wise to get a couple of guys sort of in the middle or the early to middle round drafts, or middle part of the draft?
By instinct, yes. I prefer to wait. I know we took George Kittle in round 4 or 5. He was wonderful in the playoffs, but he's like a really up and down player because the 49ers have so many weapons. And, like Kelce, a few years ago, I would have been willing to take him early, and by early, I mean in the first few picks, where now I don't want to pay that kind of premium. Mark Andrews, I don't want to take Mark Andrews at the 1-2 turn type thing. I'd rather take a guy later. And like you said, I'd rather actually take a cluster of guys between round 8 and 14, maybe take 3 of them, hope one of them hits. That's by instinct how I like to operate.
Continuing the tight end conversation, and maybe this is another guy that fits into your drafting strategy here in the main event. We have a situation in New England where Mike Gesicki got hurt. And now Mike Gesicki is back at practice after suffering that shoulder injury. Hunter Henry, tight end 23 at the 1502. Mike Gesicki, you are looking at him at, oh goodness, where is he on this list? God, I just had it, and now I can't find it. Oh, Gesicki, tight end 35, down there at the 1904 in FFPC Main Event ADP. He's basically free, Ryan. And if you look at what Gesicki did in a non-Mike McDaniel offense in Miami, where you have to be able to block a lot to get onto the field in Miami, and quite frankly, he's not a great blocker. He's a great pass catcher for tight end, but not a great blocker. And his numbers, plummeted last year. But I look at what he did before that, when he was just expected to be out there, be in the move tight end, grabbing passes, hit some really good seasons. Is he going to recapture that in New England? And I guess maybe it doesn't matter, because if you want to grab him in the 19th round. Who cares, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely willing to take a flyer on him that late. I'd be willing to take Henry in the 15th too, because Henry's probably better suited for this tight end premium format. But yes, Gesicki in round 19. Let's frame his best case scenario this way: Evan Ingram light, or not quite Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram struggled in New York. They tried to pigeonhole him into a certain role. He goes to Jacksonville. They use him with what he's good at. You want to make people chase speed. Evan Ingram's fast. He's not a great route runner. Mike Gesicki, like you said, he's not a well-rounded tight end. He's essentially like a big slot, more or less. Good athlete. Bill Belichick's always wanted two talented tight ends. That's something he's said over the years. He played in Gesicki's a Dolphin, so he's very familiar with him. He didn't get him for no reason. So yes, in the 19th round, absolutely. Let's bring on Mike Gesicki in the FFPC.
Yeah, great. It'd be a great tight end 3. I don't know if I'd count on as a backup, even if I went like Kelsey or Hawkinson or Andrew. I don't know if I'd count on him as a backup, but as a third tight end. And I always feel like you need to draft 3 tight ends in tight end premium. This tight end premium format. I think it makes a lot of sense to grab them there. Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription plus the Fantasy Football Draft Guide and cheat sheet are available. Start a free 7-day trial of Fantasy Alarm's All-Pro subscription and get the Fantasy Football Draft Guide and cheat sheet for free. Go to fantasyalarm.com/draft right now. We are going hard in this first segment. In fact, let's take a quick break. We'll step out for a couple of minutes. He's Ryan Reynolds from the 33rd Team Fantasy and Betting. Follow him on Twitter at Ryan Reynolds NFL. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. When we come back, it's the running back report. What you need to know before your draft. Players that we're going to include this week on the report. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor, pretty much do it every week. Miles Sanders, Khalil Herbert, plenty more. That's all coming up. You're watching the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Better Sports Network. So let's get into some best ball philosophy here.
Yeah.
In your experience, going back many, many, many years, drafting in national tournaments, Bradley, have you historically been shying away from the running back position in favor of wide receivers? In favor of, if you're drafting in the FFPC tight end premium format, in favor of tight ends as well. Is that the smart play when you're drafting this early in the drafting season?
Yeah, so taking value is going to be huge, and looking at like running backs and wide receivers, like you want to take a look at how the structure is. So you mentioned earlier the FFPC has a couple different types, like they've got super flex and one quarterback, and so that's going to change your strategy a little bit if you have only 2 wide receivers or if you're drafting 3 wide receivers. And of course, the PPR is a different aspect compared to other formats or other tournaments. And so keeping in mind the pass catching upside of some of the running backs may be more valuable in those formats. So the Austin Ecklers, the Christian McCaffreys may be more value because they get more receptions, and so like I loved taking late shots a couple of years ago on like the JD McKissicks of the world, who would get 50 receptions really cheaply. So that's something to consider. But when it comes to like overall value, like you're drafting, you're in the middle of a draft, and you just notice that, I don't know, maybe it's Chris Godwin has fallen 14 spots, but Chris Godwin was not in your plans to be drafting. Like maybe you don't have a strong player take on Chris Godwin, or my take is that I don't think the Bucs are going to be particularly good this year. But for him to be dropping, let's say 14 spots is more than a full round. And based on the data that we've seen, if you get to draft a player more than 12 spots ahead or behind ADP, so they drop 12 or more spots, you have an 84% edge over the rest of the tournament players who are drafting this player. because typically this player isn't going to drop. The average draft position is a really strong indicator of where a player is going to go. And I think that is also on the flip side. If you are reaching too much, you're giving up value in your drafts. And so when it comes to value-based drafting, you need to consider, just because this guy is in my plans or I don't have a strong player take on him, maybe that's your opportunity to sprinkle in some shares of this player at a good price.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Register for Dynasty Startup Drafts now at myffpc.com from the $100 level all the way up to the $5,000 level. We've been doing Dynasty for nearly a decade, have well over 1,500 leagues. A single one has never folded. That's at myffpc.com. Being joined tonight by the 33rd team's fantasy and betting lead and guy you follow on X at Ryan Reynolds NFL. Ryan Reynolds joining me tonight, and it's time for the running back report. And we'll kick things off here with this Jonathan Taylor mess. And it has been a mess all offseason. He was going to hold out. Then he was hurt. Then he wasn't hurt, but he was still going to hold out. Now he might be traded. Now he might not be traded. Like, who knows with this? It changes, seemingly every single day. Stephen Holder from ESPN reported that the Colts have given Jonathan Taylor until this coming Tuesday to find a suitable trade partner. That's interesting language. Yeah. My thoughts on this are, why would you say he has until Tuesday to find a trade partner? Because if he doesn't, or if he finds a partner, Ryan, that the Colts don't like the return on it, it's not like he's all of a sudden going to feel hunky-dory and be ready to go back and play Colts football because the season's starting and that's just what you do. He's still going to be ticked. He might still be a distraction. I don't know. But that's really interesting that they say that he has until Tuesday to do it, unless he's saying, unless the Colts line of thinking here is, we're going to give you till Tuesday, and whatever the best deal is, we're just going to take it because we're going to get some assets for you now because we're not going to pay you this huge contract that you're expecting right now. Take fantasy out of it for a second. How are you reading this situation? What do you think is the most likely scenario for this Jonathan Taylor situation to resolve itself?
That's a huge difference, right? Does he get, does he come back upset? Does he get traded? I talked to Evan Silva of Established the Run recently about this, and he referred to Jim Irsay as a meddlesome owner. And I think that's what's going on here. Like, talk about putting your new head coach, Sean Steichen, in a tough spot. Now, you got a volatile rookie quarterback in Anthony Richardson, and all of a sudden you're not only as your best skill player unhappy in Jonathan Taylor, but you're publicly releasing little pieces of information like this. I don't think anyone's going to give up a first-round pick for him because I just don't. No one's paying running backs anymore. This is the wrong year for that. So I would imagine he probably comes back more likely than not, especially since a few, like Chris Jones for the Chiefs, another one. Like, he probably comes back more than likely. He's not going to sit out a whole year and not get paid. So I would lean towards him returning, but I think he's an early third-round pick with a little bit more volatility than you want currently due to the situation.
So I'm looking at the ADP right now, running back 10 at the 306. If you feel like he's an early third-round pick, you guys have the 301 tonight. Is this a guy you're seriously going to consider at that spot, given that this could be a big-time value here?
I mean, it depends on who's there, but I can almost guarantee you we'll at least talk about him and probably look for a safer option.
I think there's merit to drafting a guy like Taylor that early in a national tournament, like the main event of the Fantasy Pros Championship, right? But I also think, take the contract stuff out of it, take the ankle, recovery out of it for a second. I mean, I don't really remember a ton of running backs, Ryan, that had a young mobile quarterback in front of them having successful seasons. Now, maybe there has been some, but none are coming to mind. So if you take out the stuff that we're focusing on here in a vacuum, I mean, does he still represent a good investment into an earlier round pick? I know the dude was going at the 102 or 101 or whatever it was last year. He's fallen quite a bit. But I think, like, beyond the ankle, beyond the contract, there might be something here that is saying, okay, if you want to take him, that's fine, but you got to exercise some caution.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In fact, before his dip, I was completely fading him more or less, just like forcing him just so I didn't have zero of them, But now, like you said, in a big tournament, especially since I think the Colts are going to peak late. I have some interest in this situation, and the best parallel I can think of is when Russell Wilson played with Marshawn Lynch early in his career. Richardson's a different runner than Russell Wilson, but the Seahawks did lean on him. And further, when Steichen was in Philly with Jalen Hurts 2 years ago, they wanted to throw more. It wasn't working. They leaned on the run game more. I would imagine they come out of the gate looking to do that. So I could see Taylor having nice volume. He doesn't really have much passing game usage historically. Probably even have less now. Richardson's touchdown equity will probably hurt him too, but the ceiling's still like pretty interesting at least.
Yeah, and we are talking about a 2-round fall in ADP, which is, I mean, how many times, and I know there was an injury issue with him last year, but how many times do we see a guy who was a 101 or 102 last year fall essentially 2.5 rounds? I mean, it's crazy to me. Let's talk about Miles Sanders, a player that I wish I would have focused on my shows throughout drafting season more than I have, because now I feel like I'm coming late to the party here and not knowing enough about him and his situation. Running back 27 at the 706. He's dealing with a groin injury right now. Again, he says he's going to be ready for week 1. That's not what the team is necessarily saying. And again, I never like to look at players talking about their own injuries, because I think they want to come out and appear much stronger and kind of illustrate that the injury is less serious than it actually is. So I never like hearing that. How nervous are you about Miles Sanders, about the injury in drafting him right now at the middle of the 7th round? And then just sort of your take on Miles Sanders now in Carolina anyway.
For most of the summer, I've been out on Miles Sanders. I was in on him last year. He's never really held up the bell cow usage. They certainly paid him in Carolina as if that's the expectation. And, there's a chance that he sees an uptick in passing game usage too from last year in Philly. But he's going in the middle of the 7th round in the FFPC. I think he at least warrants consideration in that area because, how many primary runners you're going to get in that range? A groin injury bothers me a little bit, but again, we're trying to win these things late. He's more on my radar now after hearing that he's in that range in the FFPC right now than he was literally 5 minutes ago.
What is more worrisome for you in a vacuum? A running back dealing with a preseason groin injury or a wide receiver dealing with a preseason hamstring injury?
I think I'd be a little bit more worried about the hamstring injury, but not a huge lean. It's just both problematic, both could linger.
One of the other things, Ryan, we're talking with Ryan Reynolds tonight from the 33rd Team Fantasy and Betting. I cannot wrap my head around the Buffalo Bills running game. And I'm not just saying this year. I'm saying like every year, basically, since Josh Allen has been there. Right. I never know what to expect. I never know what they're doing. It always seems to work out as far as the regular season. Playoffs, that's a different conversation. But one of the things that has been baffling to me this year, and it's starting to, in my opinion, correct itself, is James Cook's ADP. Ken Dorsey says that he has improved blocker this summer, which is huge. We care about this for fantasy, not because you get points for blocking, but that means he's going to be out in the field more, and they're going to be able to disguise what he's going to be doing on plays more, which means more rushing yards, which means more getting the ball in open spaces, right? I would think that he is going to be the lead dog this year in Buffalo's backfield. In the second preseason game, Cook started 4 carries, 20 yards. He also got in the touchdown. He is a second-year player who was a second-round pick last year. I always forget about that. He was a second-round pick. When you look at his ADP in the FFPC Main Event, James Cook is coming in right now at the running back 19, and he's going off the board at the 512. It wasn't too long ago that he was an early to mid-7th-round pick. But like I said, Ryan, I think people are starting to warm up to Cook, as well as I think that they should be warming up to James Cook. Your thoughts on Cook this year and how well you like him now paired next to Damian Harris from New England?
I was buying him in the 7th, 8th round. I've actually bought all of the Bills running backs to a degree. Buffalo brought in a thumper in Damian Harris. Then they brought in another thumper in Latavius Murray. So it's clear they want someone in that role. And now that Hine is out, not only is Cook in primary back position, they don't really have another pass catcher since Hines is going to miss the whole season. So Cook has enough upside to pay off at his current ADP, and in tournaments, that's really all that matters is upside. If you're not winning, who cares? So again, I'm not crazy about him in the 5th round, but I'd at least consider him depending on what my team looked like.
Lee Snyder chimes in too, and this is a great point that I didn't allude to. That Murray is a great short yardage guy. Damian Harris is a great short yardage guy. Now, you could say, well, those guys are just going to cannibalize each other. Well, that still means that James Cook is not getting those goal line carries. How much stock do you put into the goal line carry aspect with Cook's ADP at the end of the fifth?
That's why I was taking Damian Harris for most of the summers, because I figured 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns were on the table for him. But I do think it hurts Cook. I definitely think, we're range of outcomes guys, right? I think that definitely lowers Cook's floor. But, say like one of them gets hurt and Cook even splits goal line carries, then we're in business, So a lot of what ifs. I think I'd bet on the two bigger guys getting more goal line work than Cook in general.
And maybe I'm wrong in this, but touchdowns are not a sticky stat. What is sticky is targets. What is sticky is even receptions to a degree. And this is full PPR we're talking about in the FFPC. And maybe to my own detriment over the years, and obviously I don't play in the FFPC because I work for the FFPC, but in the full PPR leagues I played it, maybe to my own detriment, Ryan, I end up usually, siding with these pass catching running backs and maybe not putting enough stock into the goal line stuff, just because you never know with goal line, right? But if my guy's getting 4, 5, 6 targets a game or whatever, I can feel pretty good about that in the 5th round or even the early 6th round here as well. Let's talk about Tyler Algier here. Lee Snyder says his co-manager or his partner in FFPC or whatever he's playing in is watching. He wants us to weigh in on this. Bijan Robinson is a freak. We all know this. Atlanta soaked a ton of draft capital in to get him. Does Algier see his production go backwards this year? I think it does. It just matters how significant it is, because I've heard the opposing platform on the Falcons running back situation that, like, look, there's still going to be a ton of touches for Algier to get there. Bijan Robinson cannot, touch the football 450, 500 times this year. Algier's still going to be involved. What are your thoughts on how that split goes between Robinson and Algier there this year?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't spend the 8th overall pick on Bijan Robinson not to use him. So my answer is yes, Algier's production is going to go down, but I'm with you too. Like, Khalib Huntley got 10 carries a game a lot down the stretch. So I think he's going to be more in that role, a supplementary runner, where he's still going to get 8 to 12 carries most weeks. And then one of the reasons I like him is he's a premium handcuff with some standalone value, where if Bijan Robinson goes down, now we're cooking with gas a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because we saw what happened last year when Algier was the lead back, and it was great. Bijan Robinson, 109 as the running back 3. Tyler Algier, running back 48 as the 1109. So you can get him late in the 11th round on Algier. Lee, I hope that helps. I hope our thoughts had the impact on your partner the way that you thought that they would. Matt Eberflus, who is the head coach for the Bears, second-year head coach for the Bears, said that Khalil Herbert, quote, hasn't done anything to lose the job as it pertains to the starting running back role. This is in the midst of a lot of love for Rashawn Johnson in the FFPC main event, the Fantasy Pros Championship. He is getting steamed up. And I think it's with good reason from what we've seen with Johnson so far. And obviously Foreman is still there in the Chicago backfield as well. Going to the ADP as we look at it, Khalil Herbert still being drafted as a late 8th round pick, running back 32. Roshan Johnson sneaking up a little bit. He's going at that 11-12 turn at running back 49. Deontay Foreman is a mid 15th round pick as running back 60. When you look at the Bears backfield right now, obviously the big time changes they made on this offense was the midseason addition of Claypool, the trade for DJ Moore. They still have Cole Kmet there. And then they add Roshan Johnson. When you look at this Bears offense, specifically the backfield, Ryan, what do you see here as far as the value goes between these 3 running backs in Herbert, Johnson, and Foreman?
When it comes to Herbert, I actually always thought he was a bit of a better pure runner than Montgomery. Montgomery was a better all-around player, but I do think Herbert's a quality pure runner. He's already shown that he can be productive. So like Eberflus says, that's not like a great endorsement. Well, he hasn't done anything to lose his job, but he also is the default leader, and he should get the biggest share of the pie to start the year. Foreman's not going to take Roshan Johnson's workload, but he could take some of Herbert. So he's priced where he should be. And if you're looking for upside swings, Roshan Johnson has the best pass catching profile of any of these backs. So don't know how long that's going to take. As we know, sometimes it takes half a year or more for a rookie to really get going, to really carve out a big enough piece in the offense to be fantasy relevant. But if you like upside swings, I like Roschon Johnson, although round 11's a little bit earlier than I'd like to take him.
Yeah, and he could be, for all intents and purposes, the number 3 running back to open the season. And maybe he already is. I mean, Matt Eberflus said he's, quote, done a nice job competing. It's not exactly what you want to hear from a guy you got to take in the 11th round. But to your point earlier about rookie receivers, if he gets the opportunity down the stretch in the money weeks, Ryan, all of a sudden Roschon Johnson could pay off. But you're right. I think we're pushing at the point of his ADP where it gets a little bit uncomfortable drafting him there. Paul Daner Jr. covers the Bengals for The Athletic, says he thinks Chris Evans could actually serve as the passing down back in Cincinnati. And this is heartbreaking for me because in all my, I shouldn't say all my dynasty leagues, a lot of my dynasty leagues, when stuff was up in the air about Joe Mixon, I drafted Chase Brown as like a 4th round rookie draft pick. And a lot of my drafts saying, maybe there's a chance. Then things kind of cleared up for Mixon. It looks like they have been cleared up there, at least for this season. And I said, well, at least Chase Brown could be the change of pace guy or the number 2. And now it seems like Chris Evans, the other running back you want to own in Cincinnati right now behind Mixon. Now, if Mixon were to go down, I don't think Evans is the bell cow, but certainly it seems like there's some standalone value for Chris Evans on one of the best offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, with Chase Brown, I could see that being, a slow burn for him. Like, my issue with him playing this year is he's not a very good pass blocker. And especially since Joe Burrow has a bit of a calf issue, I don't think he's going to see the field early because they can't rely on him in that phase. Where Chris Evans has been with the team for years, he's at least shown flashes. To be honest with you, I've made a pretty big mistake with Evans because I've wanted to take whoever. There's 2 backfields I've wanted to know who the number 2 is all offseason, the Chargers and the Bengals. And I probably should have leaned into uncertainty a little bit more with Chris Evans since he was the incumbent, since he even played a little bit when Ryan was the guy for a while last year. So I think that's probably the case. And I definitely think he's worth a late round flyer for sure, Evans.
For sure. And Evans, I didn't even bring up their ADP. But Chris Evans right now I'll do the Cincinnati running backs in general. Joe Mixon, running back 11, 311, yeah, by far and away. But there's 3 other Cincinnati running backs that are being drafted. Chase Brown, running back 64 at the 1608. Chris Evans, running back 69 at the 1706. So 5 running backs separating them, about 10 picks on average. Brown is going ahead of Chris Evans. And then Travion Williams, don't forget about him. He's still being drafted in some drafts, not all drafts. But that's like a 19th, 20th round flyer if you believe in Travion Williams. You mentioned the Chargers running back situation. How have you been drafting the backup to Austin Eckler there? Has it been Joshua Kelly? Has it been somebody else? Have you kind of divvied up your shares pretty good on that?
I'd say when I target one of them, especially in a draft with 20 rounds, it's probably 70% Kelly, 30% Spiller. In the past, I mean, different offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, but in the past, the veterans gotten the shot first, so I could see Kelly getting the first shot, Spiller maybe getting mixed in after. That's how I've been treating it. I don't have a great answer there, though.
No, that's fine. Because this is what we want. I mean, you've drafted 500 plus drafts already. So this we want to get inside your mind here to find out. As a guy who's been doing it as a bodily function over the last several months, this is perfect. So, how important is getting the Chargers running backs? Okay, let me phrase it like this. There are a lot of people out there that will tell you that you have to get the Chargers backup running back situation right because they don't believe in Austin Eckler this year. Now, I've heard a lot of reasons for it. Certainly, you can make a case that he's going to be a bust. I don't necessarily view him as a bust. Have you been engrossed in the Chargers backup running back situation because you are fading Eckler? Or is it just a happenstance that if Eckler were to miss some time, Kelly's going to have a good week or Spiller's going to have a good week? What are your thoughts on Austin Eckler as a mid-first round pick, as usually the second, sometimes third running back off the board?
I am fading Eckler at cost, but I agree with your verbiage there where I don't think he's going to bust. I just think, a reason he saw so much passing game work last year is because Mike Williams and Keenan Allen missed significant time. Now they have Quentin Johnson thrown in the mix. So even if one of those guys does miss a month or so, you have another premium athlete that you can throw in. You don't have to rely on Eckler as much in that phase. And on top of that, new offensive coordinator. I don't know. I'd imagine Eckler will be involved in high leverage touches again. His touchdowns have been outrageous the last few years. I got burnt. I was about even on him last year, and I got a little bit. I was surprised that his touchdowns were in the same level. So fading him slightly. I've forced him just so I'm not completely out on him in best ball. Like tonight, I wouldn't take him with pick 5 or 6. Now, with the other guys, it's not so much that I want them because I don't believe in Eckler. It's because Chargers have an elite offense, top 10 offensive line. Kellen Moore is a very good offensive coordinator. If Eckler goes down, you have a premium handcuff on one of those guys potentially that you can get much cheaper than guys like, say, Jalen Warren or Tyler Algier, as we just said. So that's more so why I'm leaning into that group specifically.
You know, Ryan Lee Snyder, our resident Chargers fan in the YouTube chat tonight, actually agrees with everything you're saying about Austin Eckler for sure.
Wonderful.
Speaking of the Chargers, and this just came out, probably mid-afternoon today, about the Chargers wide receivers. Daniel Popper, who covers the team for The Athletic, said that Josh Palmer has actually been earning more first-team reps when they go 3 wide for the Chargers this year. Quentin Johnston, obviously, a lot of us thought he was going to be the number 3 receiver because of the draft capital invested, the talent that he has bringing himself to the NFL. But it's been Allen, Williams, and Palmer in 3 wide receiver sets. Johnston apparently has been dropping the football during training camp and the preseason. 2 games, he has 6 catches, 47 yards, and a touchdown. Is this another case of a guy, and you know, obviously this would be the highest drafted guy that we've talked about. Well, I shouldn't say that. We talked about Jackson Smith-Njigba, but is this another case of, yeah, Balky, Palmer is the starter in the 3 wide receiver sets right now for the Chargers, but give it some time. The cream usually rises to the top, and the cream in this case would be Johnston over Palmer, right?
That's exactly how I see it, Eric. I've been thinking about this for months, actually. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And from, you know, even from like a locker room management standpoint, it would make sense if Palmer got some significant run earlier in the year, and then either Johnston ends up seeing a jump in playing time because of injury or because he's just a more explosive athlete than Palmer. But yes, early in the year, I could see it being a split leaning towards Palmer from a volume perspective, where hopefully if you're drafting Johnston, and I have, hopefully he's one of those guys who has his best weeks late in the year.
It's got to be wheels up for Justin Herbert then, with all these weapons and Kellen Moore, right?
In season long, I love Justin Herbert. Yeah. To you know, I'll say this. I'm cool with it. When we pick at the 4 or 5 slot, if they want Patrick Mahomes, I'm like, can we just wait to see if we can get Justin Herbert in the 4th, 5th round? That's where my head's at, Eric.
Yeah, no, and I get it, and it makes perfect sense. Herbert's a guy I've actually regretted not having more shares of over the last couple of years. You know, basically since he became a starter. I feel like that the numbers he put up, and I think about what he did last year when he got his ribs crushed. I think it was like a Thursday night game. It was a primetime game. I remember that, and he fought through that all season long.
Oh yeah,
and put up some pretty decent numbers. Now Keenan Allen and Mike Williams helps, and certainly it seems like Keenan Allen is the guy as far as PPR leagues go this year. Where he is just getting a ton of catches, and the beat writers are falling all over themselves talking about the focus that he's getting in the offense. But certainly having these weapons helps Herbert, but he was a man last year. He's going to be a beast again this year. Baltimore Ravens running backs. This is another situation that it has caused me to pull my hair out over the last couple of years. We have an interesting story here from Jeff Zrebick. I believe I'm getting that name right. I apologize to Jeff if I'm not. Who covers the Ravens for The Athletic. He says Justice Hill is a near lock to make the 53-man roster. Now, he had 5 carries and for 73 yards, a catch for 13 yards so far in the preseason. He could be the 3rd down guy, which is pretty valuable, not necessarily for last year with Greg Roman as the offensive coordinator, but this year with Todd Monken as the offensive coordinator, that could be pretty valuable. He played at Oklahoma State in college, actually caught a decent number of balls there. Melvin Gordon could be on the roster bubble if Dobbins and Edwards are both checking out as healthy. It's just weird for me to think, like, with everybody that they have there, that Hill would be a near lock at this point. And if that is the case, man, we got to start looking at drafting this guy for the reasons I just stated, for what he could provide, even if he's not the bell cow there.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked him as a talent based on where he went. Not like, it's not like, oh, Justice Hill should have went in the 1st round. I feel about Justin Hill similar to how I feel about Boston Scott. In certain situations, he's a dynamic athlete that can make a bit of a difference. I'm not sure he can hold up to significant volume. I'm not quite sure I'm ready to get hurt on him again. But that report that you have here, that report that you just said, Eric,
yeah,
especially, like you said, in Tom Monken's office where they actually throw to running backs a little bit, and Gus Edwards is basically a cross-off in that area. if something happens to J.K. Dobbins, maybe Justice Hill actually has some fantasy value this year. So
Yeah,
if you're in a deep league, it's at least worth thinking about.
18th round right now in the FFPC main event ADP. I'll definitely be looking at him for sure because he doesn't the starter doesn't necessarily have to go down. And if you have an injury away type guy, he doesn't necessarily have to be getting 20 touches a game. Like that's not how it works. You can still get value, especially for a guy like him who can get by with 10 to 15 touches a game. I think it makes sense for Justice Hill in the 18th round. We have just scraped the surface on the show tonight. Well, we've done a little bit more than that. We're halfway through. But we've got another great hour of jam-packed fantasy football action coming up. We're going to put Ryan Reynolds from the 33rd team, Fantasy and Betting, on the stand right now to find out where he stands on players like Jeff Wilson, players like Tyler Higbee, Michael Thomas, Dalton Kincaid. We're getting into those, probably throw him a couple of wild cards in this as well. That's coming up next. Don't forget, in the second hour, we're also going to get into the main event strategy. What is Ryan willing to spill his guts on tonight? What is he going to keep private as he is picking with the 101 pick? That's going off at what, 10 o'clock Eastern tonight?
I believe so, yeah.
10 o'clock Eastern, drafted from the one spot. Going to be fun. We'll see how much we can get you to share with us tonight. As the high-stakes fantasy football show on the Better Sports Network rolls on, Ryan Reynolds, Eric Balkman, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
I feel like this is a quietly contentious point in Dynasty Fantasy Football, what it means to actually be rebuilding. Some people say you should never truly be rebuilding. How do you view the rebuilding versus competing dichotomy in Dynasty?
So I will be the first person to acknowledge that my preferred format of fantasy football is just redraft. The years that I have played Dynasty, it has been, I've drafted a win now team because I've seen people that have just gotten into the cycle of rebuilding and thus they just don't make any progress. So if you're rebuilding for the 5th year in a row, I just, I don't know exactly how you get out of it, but yeah, it's definitely something that can happen. And a lot of people, especially when we come out of the NFL draft, everyone's just instantly shipping off, draft picks and everything. So, I mean, it's definitely something that can happen.
Joey, do you feel similarly to it? Do you feel like you see people getting stuck in the rebuilding loop?
I mean, I would say people that try to rebuild in the beginning of seasons, of their fantasy seasons, I see them get stuck in that rut. I would really try to only ever rebuild if I knew I was going to miss the playoffs. Like, I'm always trying to play to win, even if it's maybe I don't know.
I think my big thing is the word rebuild is a much shorter time frame than I think most people say it should be. Like, they look at rebuild as like 3 years out competing. Rebuild, you're looking to compete next season. You know what I mean? Like, if you're doing it now, you're looking to revamp, and maybe there's a one season where you ship it off, but that very next season you should be competing. If you're doing it like that, I'm cool with it, but you gotta have a plan, not just keep getting the young players, keep getting the draft picks. Otherwise you end up like Tim. Maybe not like Tim who gets a bye, but you make the playoffs, you're in that like 4 to 6 range every year, just hovering in the middle. Nothing ever gets better, nothing ever gets worse.
I think I play like you in Dynasty, Simon. I play in 3-year windows.
100%. That's my go-to. And with the rate at which Dynasty leagues turn over, you should really only ever play in a 3-year window.
It's a high-stakes fantasy football show on Better Sports Network.
Three minutes past the top of the hour here on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Welcome back to the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show here on BSN. Pleased to be joined tonight with my guest co-host, Ryan Reynolds from the 33rd Team's Fantasy and Betting section. He is the guy who leads up all the content there. And, the betting markets, I think, are interesting as they've evolved over the years. You get to see a lot of interesting stuff. I would imagine it's pretty interesting to cover, like, whether it's awards or rushing or passing or receiving titles. There's a lot of cool stuff that you get into with the 33rd team, right?
There's a lot of crossover with fantasy too. I've done awards market analysis for Establish the Run. I'm continuing to do that there. And, I bet on everything to a degree, and I even view fantasy football as a variant of betting. So a lot of crossover, and definitely I pay attention to the prop markets for sure.
like as far as like the content, I know you and Larky put out podcasts too, right? Josh Larky,
Yep.
another former guest co-host of the show.
Yep. Yeah, we have a podcast releases on Monday and Thursday. We talk a lot of fantasy, talk some betting. I'm also doing power rankings for the 33rd team this year, so we'll mix in some straight football talk.
Mm-hmm.
And our guy Jordan Vanek, the wide receiver guru, Jordan Vanek. If you read Jordan's content, and he has, last year he hit on Geno Smith when he blew up the Lions. Last year he hit on Jacoby Brissett when he blew up the Bills. If Jordan Vanek has a weird quarterback in his player pool, just play the guy. Don't ask any questions.
That's good advice. And it's simple, easy to follow, obviously, as well. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, before we go on, I do want to remind everybody that the FFPC is indeed the home of season-long fantasy football. 2 separate $1 million grand prize contests, the FFPC Main Event and the Fantasy Pros Championship. Best ball leagues, dynasty leagues, our Terminator tournament, which is always fun every single year, just a twist on best ball. We are dropping one player off your roster every single week. We got the FFPC Weekly Challenge being ready to be cooked up once week 1 is here. You can actually use promo code ALARM at myffpc.com for the exclusive offer of getting $25 off your first FFPC entry of $35 or more. Just go to myffpc.com and use promo code ALARM. Where does Ryan Reynolds stand on these players? And we'll kick things off. We talked about the Saints a little bit earlier, but let's go back to him. And I have a feeling, I'm going to ask you about Jamal Williams here, but I have a feeling this is going to evolve into an entire New Orleans Saints running back discussion here. When you look at the ADP of Jamal Williams, running back 44 at the 1102, he's essentially splitting the difference between Kamara and Kendra Miller. Alvin Kamara, running back 24 at the 612. Kendra Miller, running back 54 at the 1211. Ryan Reynolds, where do you stand on Jamal Williams this season?
Jamal Williams is one of my highest exposure running backs in best ball. I think most of us were expecting 4 to 6 games suspension for Kamara. He only got 3. I still think that's fine. I especially like drafting Jamal Williams. If I take Breece Hall, can have Williams play early in the year, let Hall ease into things for fantasy purposes. But the primary reason I'm interested in Jamal Williams, who he ran for 1,000 yards last year, led the league in rushing touchdowns, is that the Saints have a pretty good offensive line and they have the league's easiest schedule. So even with Kamara back, I could see Williams leading the team in carries. I could see him approaching 10 touchdowns. If you're a zero running back builder, he's the kind of guy that I want on my team.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense too. So for you, the way that the Saints ADP for the running backs are situated, is Kamara just an easy fade at this point? Is he a guy to say, like, you know what, I'm out on this guy. I'd rather wait around and see what happens if I can get a deal on Williams or Miller?
Well, I can tell you. Let me frame this to you this way, Eric. So let's say through 5 rounds we don't have a running back yet. And Alvin Kamara is sitting there at 6.12. I wouldn't mind taking a shot there in a big tournament like this one. Not at all.
And that makes sense too. Are people making too much of Kendra Miller's performance in the preseason so far? Made some pretty good plays, and obviously was dinged up, which obviously hurt him, coming into drafting season. But seems to be healthy now. And people will tell you that Kamara and Jamal Williams are not ascending assets, where Kendra Miller is. We already talked about the value of having these young ascending assets in the money rounds of the latter portion of the season. Does Kendra Miller fit that category?
Yeah. I could see him being one of those guys who peaks late in the year. I could also see him being one of those guys where Alvin Kamara isn't brought back next season. Kendra Miller sees a bigger role. Like him in Dynasty more than redraft this year.
Let's go into Miami. Before I ask you about Jeff Wilson, I don't think I brought up the whole Jonathan Taylor to Miami discussion. You think he's more likely to play for Indianapolis come Tuesday? If he does get traded, is Miami the best spot for fantasy for him, or is there a better spot out there?
Taylor is a zone runner. Miami runs a lot of zone. Offensive line's okay, but so is the Colts last year. It's not like the Colts were world beaters in their offensive line, and they have an obvious need for a headliner. So I don't think Miami's going to give Indianapolis a first-round pick, so that's why I don't think that's going to happen. But if he went to Miami, yes, that would be excellent for his fantasy prospects. And if you're taking him in the early to mid-third round, you're celebrating if he ends up being a Dolphin.
Speaking of the Dolphins, Jeff Wilson. Let's talk about him for a second, because Devon Achane had us all gasping when we found out that he got carted off. Sounds like he's going to be okay, but again, I don't know how forthcoming NFL teams are on these injuries in the preseason because they don't necessarily have to be that forthcoming on it.
Yeah.
Which means Raheem Mostert went up in ADP. I saw him go up about a round and a half in some cases. What about Jeff Wilson, running back 50 as it stands right now in the FFPC main event? You're looking at drafting him in the mid-12th round. Your thoughts on what Wilson could do for fantasy owners this year? And you can answer this both in season long and or best ball.
I mean, before his ADP spike, I literally had him in the queue of like every draft I took for months, just hoping that Dalvin Cook didn't sign there. Now, the thing with both of them, Mostert and Wilson, and even A-Chain to a degree, is Mike McDaniel tended to operate as a hot hand running back committee operator. So it's probably going to be hard to peg which guy to play week in and week out in regular season long. Mm-hmm. But, again, if I have an anchor running back or a zero running back team, do I want a guy like Jeff Wilson in the 12th round or so? The answer is I definitely do, just to try to keep you alive while you're waiting for some of those big handcuffs to maybe benefit from an injury.
Leah Snyder brings up another good point in the YouTube chat right now, and it's something I actually agree with. And Ryan, I want to get your thoughts on this. Are we seeing a lot of reports this year, more than usual, about players being carted off? I mean, carted off is like the worst thing that, for fantasy purposes. So it used to be like the worst thing that you could hear. Like, oh my God, my season could be over. This guy could be out like a month and a half. Like I see a cart and I'm like, okay, that's minimum 4 to 6 weeks, right?
Right.
And now I see it all the time in preseason. Have you noticed that too? That it seems like we're seeing that more and more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess in preseason they use the card as a more precautionary measure. Where in season maybe they don't, which doesn't really make any sense at all if you think about it. Like, well, these guys are valuable money making businessmen essentially. If they're a little banged up, like we're going to let them walk on their own power in the regular season, but not in the preseason. I agree. It's being used a little bit too often, too liberally.
Yeah, and I just hear carted off, and I'm like, okay, carted off means crossed off my draft.
Yeah, right.
My draft list, and I can't do that anymore because A-Chain's already back. We talked about Gesicki too, and maybe this Judy thing, like Judy was carted off. Maybe it won't be serious. I don't know. It remains to be seen. We're still in an information gathering phase with that right now. So that's where we're at on Jeff Wilson. Throw you a curveball here, and I feel like I bring him up every week because I don't get why he's not going higher. But maybe you could shed some light on it. Javonte Williams, running back 18 at the 509. This is as high as I've seen him. I mean, I was seeing this even after Sean Payton said that this guy is going to be ready for the start of training camp. He was still an 8th round pick. Then Sean Payton said this dude is going to be playing in preseason. He was still a 7th round pick. Now, after what we saw when Sean Payton said, yeah, he's going to play 12 to 14 snaps or whatever, and I think he had like 3 or 4 catches or something like that on 5 targets in his last preseason game, looked pretty good. Now he's finally climbing, running back 18 at the 509. To me, that still seems kind of low based on what we saw this guy do last year. And I know it was a serious knee injury. Javonte Williams, are you more or less likely to take the plunge on him in the mid to late 5th round, Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah, I mean, what a trip it's been with him this offseason. I'm not sure. I talk with Josh Larkey about this kind of stuff all the time, trying to figure out where to rank guys. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we've spent more time on anyone than Javonte Williams, where he was in the J.K. Dobbins situation injury-wise, where J.K. Dobbins had a pretty rocky 2022, so we were fading him. And then, you see the reports getting progressively better. And like you said, this guy saw a significant run in a preseason game. So, even if he's eased in early in the year, he's got the Chargers run sieve in week 17 when fantasy championships are won. Mm-hmm. He's at least going to be a discussion if he's around in round 5 when we pick.
I think that's smart. And I think that I'm a little nervous, Ryan, because I feel like I'm going to be overweight on this guy this year. And I don't want to be overweight on a guy coming off a serious knee injury. But, man, everything I've seen and heard from the team so far, it's like maybe it's not that bad. And until the market adjusts, I think I'm going to be still investing in him in the 5th round. Moving on to receiver here. I know we touched on, this is sort of like the unofficial New Orleans Saints edition of the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. But I want to get back to it. Michael Thomas, you kind of alluded to it earlier. This guy has played 10 games in 3 seasons. He was already dealing with some stuff in training camp and preseason. He's been out there, but my goodness, the thing is with Thomas, and I'll bring up his ADP because I think that's crucial to this conversation. Yeah. Wide receiver 41 at the 805 for a guy who, is he still the season single season record in receptions, or did Cooper Kupp break that? I forget. But he's right up there. He's first or second if he's not.
Oh.
We've seen him do it. We know he can do it. He's got a more competent quarterback there this year in Derek Carr. Now, Chris Olave is obviously going to be fighting him for targets there. Where do you stand on Michael Thomas this year?
In a lot of drafts, he's going in the 9th round, where I think that's a spot where I'm gonna dive into uncertainty there. If he gets hurt, so be it. He plays the Titans in week 1. Titans are a pass sieve. They've been crushed. And, even when Thomas played last year, he was good. But 8 rounds, at least getting closer to an appropriate pricing for him.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on roster construction. But the truth of the matter is, like, how many guys could you take in the 8th round that could end up going in the 3rd round next year? He's definitely a consideration from that front, but I'm a little bit more tepid in the 8th round on him.
A lot of times when I have guests on, and I will know how they stand on certain players, and I want them to execute their case live on air for it. And then other times I just throw in names because I haven't made up my mind on how I feel about these guys.
Cool.
Selfishly, I want to know how the industry is treating them, and people who do this for a living are treating them. And Deontay Johnson is one of those guys this year. Kenny Pickett in that Steelers offense, they added Allen Robinson. It almost seems like he's an afterthought. I mean, like I can't even ask you where you stand on Allen Robinson because the pedestal's not big enough for anybody to stand on it at this point. Calvin Austin's been turning it on. Obviously, George Pickens there. He's been getting steamed up. But a guy I don't hear a whole lot about, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, is Deontay Johnson in this offense, a guy that we loved all those years at Ben Roethlisberger. He caught all those passes. It was fantastic for PPR leagues. Wide receiver 26 right now. He's going after Drake London and Mike Williams. He's going before Terry McLaurin and Brandon Ayuk. Ryan Reynolds from the 33rd team. Where do you stand on Deontay Johnson at the 507 wide receiver 26?
I know I was definitely buying him when he was cheaper all offseason. Now, again, it's similar to Mike Thomas. I think that's kind of the price range he belongs in. That's kind of the cluster of players I'd have him in. If you're in full PPR, he's a better player than in half PPR. He's definitely a better player in full PPR than standard. Or a guy like DK Metcalf's the sort of guy you want in standard. Mm-hmm. But I like Deontay Johnson. I think Kenny Pickett takes a step forward. Steelers' offensive line was improved this offseason. I like Calvin Austin in Dynasty. I'm not sure I'm worried about him making a major impact this year, but if Deontay Johnson's like top 8 in targets at the end of the year, wouldn't surprise me. And again, he's a guy like in round 5, if we need a 3rd wide receiver, we're going to have a conversation about him.
We will have a conversation about him, and sort of like the recurring, like if I have a conversation on this show every week about Javonte Williams, the receiver equivalent to that is definitely Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley is a guy and I've had the most ardent supporters of Calvin Ridley come on here and tell me, Balky, this is why you need to be drafting him in the 3rd round. This is why this guy is going to be huge for fantasy this year. This is why this guy's not going to miss a beat and he's going to put up huge numbers and you want him on your team. I still remain unmoved. I shouldn't say unmoved. I still remain not on the other side of the fence. Like maybe I'm leaning on the fence and thinking about jumping over to the Calvin Ridley side of the fence. But I think right now I'm still on the other side. This guy's missed so much time. This guy is in a new offense this year. And I know he's shown out so far in preseason. And I know it's a talented offense. And he's got a good head coach. And he's got a good OC and a good staff around him. And it seems like, and I read his article on the Players Tribune as well. And I feel like I got a look inside his head and what he was thinking with the gambling and the suspension and sort of what he went through. And obviously the mental health aspect of it as well. But for me, ADP is almost, if not more important than the player itself. And Calvin Ridley is going as wide receiver 15. He's moved up to the 302. He's going to be in the 2nd round before you know it in the FFPC main event, Ryan. It's too rich for my blood. Is it also too rich for yours?
See, Josh and I had Dave Kluge from Football Guys on the podcast earlier this week, and he framed this very well. I like Calvin Ridley's upside in tournaments, and season long, I'm a little scared of his floor. I think that makes a lot of sense, especially at his current cost. I was buying him all the time when he was around the 3-4 turn. I couldn't get enough of him. Right now, at 3.01, 3.02, I'll talk about him, but he probably has top 5 upside at the position. So again, I think you have to consider him, but is he a lock and load? Let's take him at the 3.01. Let's take him to 3.02. I don't think he necessarily is. it all boils down to what's your risk tolerance.
Yeah.
Mine's pretty high, so I'm comfortable taking him, especially in tournaments. But yeah, he's getting a little too rich at this point.
I want to go back out to Jim Parsons Jr., who's watching us on Facebook tonight. Thanks for watching, Jim. He has a question. He's in a 12-team Superflex full PPR league. He has the 9th pick in that league. He's thinking about grabbing Austin Eckler or Bijan Robinson there, and then coming back on quarterback at the 204 in the following round. And I guess my advice to you, and listen, you know your league better than Brian and I do because you play in it. My guess, just, I look at our Superflex ADP. My guess would be, if you want to go quarterback, maybe you go quarterback in the first round, because I think you probably got about a 70-75% chance, maybe even higher, that one of those two running backs is available to you in the second round. Austin Eckler has an ADP of 203 in our Superflex tournament. Bijan Robinson has an ADP of 205 in our Superflex tournament. If you skip, let's say you take Eckler or Bijan Robinson in that first round at that 9th pick, and you want a quarterback when it comes back to you, maybe Deshaun Watson's there, maybe not. Otherwise, you're looking at guys like Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones, Kirk Cousins. And I'd be looking at Herbert, Fields, Lawrence, if he's still there, as my first quarterback, and then worrying about running back in the second round. Ryan, how do you see this situation?
I quite literally don't have any alternative advice. That's exactly how I see the situation. I think Lawrence is the cutoff in safe premium quarterbacks. He's usually gone right around the 9th pick. So I'd also take a quarterback, see what happens to running back in the second round.
Jim is saying that his league tends to wait on quarterback. If that is the case, then you could probably get away with Eckler or Robinson. Maybe that's actually a good value in your league. And if you could scare up, Fields, Lawrence, one of those guys in the second round, more power to you. You know your league better than us, and if that's the way, I think Jim, I think you just answered your own question, right? I think you know what you want to do, and we're just guiding you to there. I didn't have this guy in the rundown either, but I do want to talk to you about Josh Downs from Indianapolis. Now, he's a player. I don't think I got a whole lot of him in my dynasty drafts this year. I do want to bring him up for the purposes of the latest news on him. If I can bring it up here. The beat writer, James Boyd, who covers the Colts for The Athletic, says that Downs, he used the phrase a volume target. That's what Downs has been through training camp and the preseason. He's always been from the slot. 5 of those 17 routes he's been targeted on in the preseason, 4 catches, 49 yards, again, in limited action. It's not like he's been out there a ton. Downs had 4.48 speed, good run after the catch type guy. And he's just got to beat out Isaiah McKenzie for that slot job in Indianapolis. If that's the case, and he beats him out, and he's a big part of this offense, he's a steal because he's free right now in the FFPC main event. Wide receiver 95 at the 1908. Ryan, I don't normally like taking receivers late. I like to stack up my injury away type running back guys late. But man, Josh Downs in the 19th round, sign me up for that.
So I love them as a talent coming in. I wanted them to go to Dallas because Dallas needs a short area separator for their offense. But I also kind of fall in love with separators with very small catch radiuses, and Josh Downs fits into that mold. Anthony Miller was one of those kind of guys. So that would be my concern with him in terms of a floor long term. For this year, what does voluminous mean for the Indianapolis Colts? Betting markets have Anthony Richardson's over/under passing yards at 2,800. That's almost appallingly low, and he's already been named the opening day starter. So I love Josh Downs. I definitely took him in Dynasty, probably more than I should have. Not super, like you said. I'd rather take injury away handcuffs. Right. Potential difference makers, where it's like in a league where you can have max start 4 wide receivers. What's the path to Josh Downs playing for you? Yeah, that would be my question if you're considering him late. But I like him as a player. I do.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind too, and this is probably I'm doing 10 drafts this weekend. I'm doing 9 drafts in an auction, I think, or salary cap, excuse me. And I think that with Josh Downs, there's probably gonna be a couple of those leagues where I'll draft him in the 18th, 19th round. Keep him on my roster, right, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, just to see how the situation evolves. And if it is just a deep yawning chasm as far as the Colts passing offense goes, he's an easy drop, and I could pick up whoever the sexy waiver wire guy is that week. Maybe there's a running back with an opportunity that presents himself because of injury, and I can easily drop Downs then. So I think you make a good point. fun to think about, but join me back on planet Earth, Balky. I think that there's some things that you're missing here. Tight ends, where do you stand on Tyler Higbee this year in Los Angeles? Cooper Kupp, we found out today he's going to be ready for week 1. He's already practicing, which is a good sign. But the second target in Los Angeles, Van Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Cam Akers. I mean, there's a lot of options there. I don't think anybody's really stepping forward. Is it Higbee? Is he a guy that we should be looking at? Ryan, where do you stand on Tyler Higbee in FFPC tight end premium drafts this year? Tight end 14 at the 10.04.
Oh, that's exciting, actually. I think he's really good for tight end premium because he's more of a volume receptions guy. My plan with drafting tight ends in general is I want to do one of two things. If I get a TJ Hawkinson or I build a Travis Kelce or whatever type team with a premium guy, Darren Waller's probably the end of that list. Maybe Kyle Pitts is the end of that list. I don't need Tyler Higbee. If I don't, I want Pat Freiermuth or Tyler Higbee as my stability player, ideally, and then I want to take a bet on a more upside guy like, Juwan Johnson, see if he can surpass Higbee. But the thing that's interesting about Higbee is good volume guy. He's had some slate breaking touchdown compilations a few times in the past where he's had 2 or 3 scores in a game. So I really like him in the FFPC. Kind of wouldn't mind having him tonight on my team.
Yeah, and we'll see. You seem surprised at the ADP. I think you thought he was going to be going higher, and he's not.
Yeah,
this is a sweet spot for you. So good to hear on Higbee because I have him in several dynasty leagues. Dalton Kincaid, Joe Buscaglia, who covers the Bills for the Athletic. Boy, a lot of the Athletic should be paying for royalties tonight as much as we've mentioned them on this program. Josh Allen has complete trust in Dalton Kincaid. Almost every day, Kincaid is exhibiting excellent route running, movement skills for a guy that his size, and he's catching the ball, turning upfield, and getting more yardage after that. Allen, it seems like Allen trusts Kincaid. Kincaid got open in the middle of the field on Monday's practice and on the last play, and Allen threw him kind of a low and away pass to keep it away from the defender. It wasn't poor accuracy, and Kincaid got it for a long gain. Now, the Bills already have Dawson Knox. They're probably going to be utilizing more 2 tight end sets this year. And why wouldn't you? Because Gabe Davis is kind of hit or miss. Khalil Shakir is whatever, then James Cook is still sharing the backfield with potentially 2 other guys. So Kincaid is being drafted right now in the FFPC as tight end 10 at the 9.01. Everybody was excited about him in Dynasty. I think it's worn off a little bit, but should the shine be wearing off on Dalton Kincaid right now as his ADP stands as tight end 10 in the 9th round? Ryan, where do you stand on Dalton Kincaid?
See, I was happy about Higbee's ADP. I'm not happy about Kincaid's because I think this is one of the more important solves in fantasy this year. And, I'm gonna walk through the whole thing if you don't mind. Sure. Dawson Knox was just extended. He's making $10 million a year. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. He's more of a traditional tight end. I'm more of a film guy than a data guy. When I watched Dalton Kincaid, I saw 3 reps. It's like he's more receiver than tight end. So the rumors that he sees a lot of work in the slot makes sense to me. Josh Allen was apparently thrilled when they got him, probably because he sees him as like, maybe this is my Travis Kelce. That's obviously a very ambitious phrase. Travis Kelce's the best pass-catching tight end in the history of the sport. But Kincaid, he's more wide receiver than tight end. I could, like you said, they're going to probably run more 2 tight end sets. Teams are playing more cover 4 against them. They don't want Josh Allen to throw the ball downfield. Kincaid's skill set fits in nicely with that. More 2 tight end sets, see significant reps from the slot. I think, again, we're trying to win tournaments here. The 9th round's a little expensive for him, but I love him as a home run swing. I really do.
And I think that's, we're looking at, you don't necessarily want to be swinging for home runs in the 9th round. Right. I don't think that's plan A, but it's not a bad plan B, right? Depending upon how your draft goes. And so I think Kincaid would make sense for, again, like you have said over and over tonight, team construction. How does your team look when you're on the clock and considering this guy? Because that factors into it as well. And we're going to actually get into that in the next segment too. Last tight end I want to bring up with you tonight is Evan Engram, a guy who signed a 3-year, $42 million contract this offseason, 73 catches, 766 yards, and 4 scores last year with Trevor Lawrence. Still Christian Kirk and Zay Jones on this team, but Calvin Ridley is the other guy, the other part of this equation that we didn't figure for last year. Engram right now in the FFPC main event ADP is going off as tight end 9 at the 7-12. He's basically a handful of spots behind Pat Freiermuth, but he is about a round and a half, almost a round and a half in front of Dalton Kincaid. Knowing what we know about Jacksonville this year, knowing what we know about Calvin Ridley, where do you stand on Evan Engram, Ryan?
I think that's a fair price for him. I think I'm probably out at that price. I've kind of been light on him all year. I was on Evan Engram last year. I bought him cheap, paid big dividends in a lot of spots. Kind of don't want to pay the premium for him this year. But again, in a tight end premium format like the FFPC, you have to at least consider anyone that can have a big year at the position. I think I'm going to pass, but I wouldn't try to talk you out of it if you wanted to take him in that range, especially if you're stacking him with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Engram, not a player that anybody gets too excited about historically. Right. But a lot of people were excited after the season that he put up last year when he went so cheap in drafts. That wraps up Where Do You Stand on tonight. I also want to remind everybody to join all of our live talk shows on the Better Sports Network YouTube channel. You can call in or live chat with our hosting community. Thanks, shout out to everybody who's been doing that tonight. You can watch all our shows and see clips of our best moments and interviews on YouTube, Twitter, and, of course, bettersports.com. We are T-minus, what would it be, 1 hour and 30 minutes, 90 minutes, 89 minutes and change before Ryan Reynolds will be drafting in the FFPC main event for a $1 million grand prize, drafting from the 1 spot tonight. And we want to get into the strategy. How much is he willing to share? Are people who are in his draft watching tonight? Maybe, maybe not. So maybe. We'll find out how he feels about certain, not necessarily players. We've been talking a lot of players, but I do want to get into strategy and game theory maybe a little bit coming up in this final segment, because this is something we can all learn from and benefit from. Ryan Reynolds from the 33rd Team Fantasy and Betting. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Don't go anywhere. Back after this.
The Detroit Lions select Sam Laporta, tight end, Iowa.
Had to go with your boy Sam Laporta there to pair with TJ Hawkinson.
Sammy, I couldn't double down on rookie tight ends. I think that would take it. That's taking it a little too far.
This could be one of the most exciting rookie tight end classes in a while, just based on the archetypes of these guys, of the Dalton Kincaids and the Sam Laportas. Obviously, Green Bay drafted 2 themselves with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So after Kincaid, I would say is probably the consensus with tight ends. Like, who do you like as far as the best ball, like an end of best ball? Do you like Laporta, or is there anybody else you like more?
I do like Laporta. We're looking for guys that can be a top 2 target on their team. So any path, any argument you could make, right? So you can make the argument that Dalton Kincaid is going to be a top 2 target with after Stephon Diggs. You can make an argument that with Jamison Williams suspended, now Sam Laporta is just going to play straight up wide receiver. He looks like a wide receiver. Why can't he line up out wide at split end, right? It's like Marvin Jones and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would also throw another name in the ring, and I don't mind, since we're doing this for the fans, for the kids. He's still on the board. Luke Musgrave on your Packers. They're not super loaded at wide receiver. We like the guy Reed they drafted, but you never know. So why can't Luke Musgrave be a big slot? In fact, they drafted 2 tight ends, Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Tucker Kraft is more of an inline guy. They might just go 2 tight ends right away. Tucker Kraft inline, Luke Musgrave in the slot. Why can't he be a target monster for Jordan Love? So those are the guys, those are the conditions that you need for a rookie tight end to succeed. They need to not only be the best pass catching tight end on the team, but a top 2 pass catcher on the team outright. That's how you get Kyle Pitts. Evan Engram as a rookie was top 5 because Odell Beckham Jr. hurt his knee 4 weeks into the year. So that's the formula. We're looking for guys that can actually be a top target right away. Otherwise, we're playing the sit and wait long-term game, which is what you're doing with guys like Michael Mayer.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
"26 minutes and change until Garrett Price and your favorite Dynasty nerds take over the BSN airwaves. I'm Eric Balkman here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the FFPC on the Better Sports Network. can check me out on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. Of course, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown as well. Ryan Reynolds from the I almost said the NFL, but your X name is at Ryan Reynolds NFL. Ryan Reynolds from the 33rd Team Fantasy and Betting, the lead there. Also check out his submissions and his collaborations with Establish the Run as well. What we want to talk about right now is your collaboration with your two co-managers tonight. And get your thoughts on what you want to do. As a reminder, you can win a $1 million grand prize in the FFPC Main Event. Ryan and his cohorts are drafting at 10 p.m. Eastern time to try to win that $1 million, and they're doing so from the 101 spot. We've kind of talked a little bit about who you're thinking at 101. Any insight that you can give into that, as well as sort of your strategy after you see the ADP? You've seen what has happened so far in the main event. What's your strategy from the one spot tonight? How are you trying to construct this specific team?
Yeah, I think first I'll talk about the guys I'm doing this with. Cody Main, he's been murdering preseason slates, won like 30 grand in the last 2 weeks in preseason slates. He's a data guy, very data driven. Gary Hartman's won Millie Makers before. He's won tournaments in both basketball and the NFL. He's more of a blend guy. I'm more of a blend guy that leads towards film. So I lean Jamar Chase first overall. I have a feeling they probably both lean towards Justin Jefferson. I don't have any problem with that at all. Mm-hmm. In some ways, I'd almost rather go in that direction. So my expectation is we'll start off with a wide receiver, and then we have two options. I either want to go zero running back or anchor running back. We'll see what's there. We're not going to force anything. It's going to be best player available for the most part in the first 3 rounds. I just hope we don't have to overdraft a tight end early.
A couple of things to unpack there. Number one, why do you lean towards Chase over Jefferson? Because if you were doing this team by yourself, you'd be taking Chase. Why do you like Chase over Jefferson this year?
I probably would. I mean, he led the league in targets per game last year. I think him and Jefferson are at least equivalent talents. This is also a bit of a sports betting angle. I think Jamar Chase is going to be this year's offensive player of the year. I think this is Joe Burrow's year too. They have more tougher opponents on their schedule. And one of the things with the Bengals is their passing game volume goes up when they're in tight games, for the most part, not always, but for the most part. So I think there's going to be more volume in their passing game than some people expect. And on top of that, this could be Joe Burrow's best supporting cast for the rest of his career, because they're going to have to start paying everyone in Cincinnati. Right. They got an upgrade at left tackle in Orlando Brown, so they're going to have more time to throw, more stability in that area. So I like his ceiling more, especially his week-to-week ceiling. I think he has the highest weekly ceiling out of any wide receiver there is, because he catches more touchdowns than Justin Jefferson. That said, I think Justin Jefferson's safer, and I don't have a big issue with it.
Okay, so I think that's the second part of my question here. You said those guys will probably want Jefferson, and you'll probably go that way, which you'd actually prefer. Why would you prefer the Jefferson? Because you just said you like Chase better than Jefferson. Why would you prefer Jefferson tonight?
It's a wonderful question. Thank you for not just hanging me out to dry where I sound like a madman. Thank you for picking me up, Eric.
Well, I just want to make, because I want to understand myself.
No, it makes sense. I'm pretty overweight on Chase in best ball. And one of the things I like to do, especially with a main event team where, it's $2,000 buy-in, that's a pretty good chunk of change. I like to get exposure to someone, because I don't dislike Jefferson, but I've had to be a little bit underweight on him to get overweight on Chase. So I don't mind hedging with Jefferson in case he duplicates what he did last year with a little bit more touchdowns, which, it's certainly on the table. So I'd be okay with basically treating this team as a Justin Jefferson hedge versus Jamar Chase, who I have much more money tied up into in a variety of different ways.
I would be willing to bet that there's a significant plurality of people watching tonight who just have always historically played in their closed 10-team, 12-team family leagues, friends leagues, office leagues, whatever. And they probably crushed it, because you're watching Ryan Reynolds. You clearly know what you're doing for fantasy football. But I would also say that those people are trying to think about taking the next step, maybe to the Fantasy Pros Championship, maybe to the FFPC Main Event. And obviously, Ryan, the strategy changes when you are drafting to try to beat 11 people as opposed to 11,000 people. When you're drafting tonight in the main event, how does your strategy change knowing that you're going to have to beat out thousands of people for that big carrot of the $1 million grand prize?
Well, one thing, we want to do things that are smart. Like, we'll stack if we can. We're not going to go crazy and force something, but if, say we take Jamar Chase, we're going to look to take Joe Burrow in round 4 or 5. I think that's almost a given for any, anyone who's playing in tournaments like this. They already know that. On top of that, what I'll say is, like, my risk tolerance is pretty high. I'm an upside guy, so inherently I'll take more chances than most people will. I'm pretty confident in my player evaluations versus the field. That said, I'm willing to go safer early, especially if I'm playing with other people. So, I'm more comfortable being more aggressive with my own money than other people's, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I'll listen. Yeah, I'll listen to them. We're not going to do anything crazy in the first couple of rounds, but like once we start getting like eight round plus, I want difference makers. I want guys that I have strong stances on. I don't care what consensus is in a lot of areas. And I want to, one thing that we're going to do, especially those guys, because they're excellent DFS players, we want to get some uniqueness to our team. We want to create an advantage through that element too. So I'd say those are what we're going to collectively build the foundation of our strategy on.
I've talked with plenty of high stakes players over the years that have had a partner or two partners. I've even had people come on that were a team of 4 guys that
Sure.
Together trying. And I've had other people tell me that, like, I could never have a partner or co-manager. I got to be able to draft my team. It would drive me nuts if I had to compromise or go with somebody else's pick rather than my own there. So I think there's 2 schools of thought. Now, you have 2 partners on this tonight. Obviously, there's no doubting their chops. I mean, they're super talented. They've done huge things, won in massive amounts of money. But when you guys disagree, how do you figure that out? And then do you ever have any caution anytime all 3 of you agree on a certain player, like, ooh, maybe we're missing something here? What scares you more?
That's a good question. I would say when the 3 of us agree, we come from different angles. It's the same like with player props. When Josh Larkey, Ben Wolby, and I are all in the same thing, I'm pretty confident in that because we're all coming at it from a different angle. Same with Cody and Gary. If we're aligned on something, I'm pretty comfortable with it. Now, when we're all like, they're probably more likely to agree than I am. I might be. If we're going to be on an island, I'm probably going to be on the island the most often. So I'm a reasonable guy. They're both smart dudes. One thing that I'll be assertive on is defense. They're data guys. They're not allowed to pick defenses. I'll pick the defense. But yeah, in general, it's one of the things too that I draft so many teams of my own. So like I'm not really worried about, if I was going to do 1 draft a year, I would definitely draft it on my own. But I do so many, doing a number of them with other people, especially smart guys like those, or like if you and I did a draft, you get to see how the other guy thinks, and maybe that makes your whole process better. And in an environment like this, where like everyone in the FFPC is a good player for the most part, at least in my experiences, iron sharpens iron is the phrase.
Yep. I think it's interesting that you bring up defense because we don't talk a whole lot of defense on this show. Tomorrow morning, I'm actually flying down to Louisville, Kentucky to draft in the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, which I do every year. Nice. It's a blast. Highly recommend it, kffsc.com. But the defensive scoring in that format is it's important to have a good defense. Like the swings are pretty big. So you got to have a good defense. Can you give us a few of your favorite defenses this year that you've been locked in on?
I love leagues that enhance defensive scoring, especially if it's by points against. I love that.
Yeah.
Obviously, like it matters where they go, but the 49ers, they start early with good opponents. They're obviously a premium defense, but they also end in the fantasy playoffs with excellent opponents. I believe they play Washington in week 17, where they'll have a line play advantage. So they're at the top of the list for me. If you're looking for one that's a little bit more under the radar, the Saints, again, the schedule. They have so many cupcakes on their schedule. I like them to exceed expectations. Green Bay has an interesting ceiling just because they have so many like blue chip talented players on that team. Their pass rush could potentially be a top 10 unit. Their secondary could potentially be a top 10 unit, good linebacker group. The problem is, like last year they underachieved, but if they reach their potential, they have a pretty good schedule, especially early, and they have a lot of paths to being a top 5 unit. So if you want to take one late, I'd go with Green Bay, I think.
Yeah, that's been my bold hot take that I've been saying for the last few months is I think Green Bay finally puts it together this year. And they finish as a top 5 defense. Couple of things about the Packers defense. the much maligned here in Northeast Wisconsin defensive coordinator for Green Bay, Joe Barry. A lot of people they think he misuses the components he has on his team. They don't think he uses Jair Alexander right. They don't think he is putting the pass rushers in the best position to succeed. He should be utilizing more press coverage with how talented those corners are. And if you looked at last year and I can't believe this is turning into a defensive segment, but it is. If you looked at how they ended last season, the last 5 or 6 games. Now I know that it was a cupcake schedule, and it was a lot of really opponents there for the taking. But Joe Barry, you could see how he changed his philosophy a little bit. And then after the season was over, and I just found out about this a couple of weeks ago, he met with the defense. This is something that he normally does not do meet with the whole team or the whole defensive squad. And he basically said, look, how do you guys want to play next year? And Jair Alexander called him out a couple of times. If you read between the lines, did not think that they were going in the right direction. And so he basically said, like, look, we're going to play how you guys want to play. Let's do that. And I think if you have that meeting, you are clearly under the impression that, like, look, I may be out of ideas here, or at least I need some fresh ideas. I think this is the year that they put it all together. Rashawn Gary, he won't be playing on Saturday against the Seahawks, but I bet he's ready for week 1. He's not willing to say it yet, but he's already practicing, coming off that torn ACL. Either he or Alexander are their best defensive player. Lucas Van Ness, I think, is going to be a good guy that comes on at the end of the season. And the fact that they moved Kenny Clark outside to have TJ Slayton on the inside, that's going to free up that defensive line to do a lot of special things. And it looks like they hit on their 3rd and 4th round picks in Carl Brooks and Colby Wooden. That ends the defensive discussion. I'm sorry, I just had to get it out. I love the Packers defense.
I loved it. So don't apologize to
All
me.
right, I won't apologize to you. I'm more for the viewers because I knew you were digging it. And Derek Brown, I had him on one of my other shows, Derek Brown from Fantasy Pros on Tuesday. He basically echoed your sentiments about the Saints. He thinks he's getting them everywhere he can. They're a great defense to draft because of how soft their first month and a half of the season is at a minimum. And then you can kind of figure it out after that. You drafted with Josh Larkey in Pros versus Joes. I believe, was it earlier this month or late last month? It was probably about 4 weeks or so.
I think it was late July. Yeah.
Late July. Okay. What did you learn from that format? Again, that's best ball, and you're just trying to beat 11 other teams. But what did you learn from that draft that's going to help you in the main event tonight?
Just a great experience. In general, whenever you're, because like if you hop in a best ball draft on Underdog, like you might have 5 guys that really don't know anything about roster construction or anything like that. In the Pros versus Joes matchup, that's not really the case. Maybe you get 1 at most. So what we did on that team is we abandoned tight end. We took tight ends late. We took 5 of them. A couple of guys like John Daigle took Tyler Conklin. Ben Gretsch took Trey McBride, who like foiled our plans a little bit. But basically, we built 3 strengths: running back, quarterback, wide receiver. We're all very strong. Tight end is 5 players to hopefully make 1 in a best ball format. So the other thing I'd say you'd learn in any industry draft or any high stakes draft is when you're playing with people that are like really zeroed in this stuff, you kind of like normal ADP kind of gets thrown out the window more than it traditionally would. So if you're doing this kind of thing for the first time, don't expect that you're going to be able to just pick off a list. You're going to have to color outside the lines a little bit more often.
Well, and then the other thing too, now, were you in Jeff Manns' draft? I can't remember if you were or not. I don't think you were.
I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Okay, but Jeff Manns every year he cares not for ADP. He just goes out and gets his guys. Oftentimes he will draft them a round or 2, sometimes 3 rounds ahead of ADP because these are the guys he believes in. These are the guys he goes out and gets. And I think that, you talk about people not understanding team construction. You also have to allow for people going out and getting their guys. And maybe a guy like Jeff Manns kind of throws a monkey wrench in for not only the teams immediately to his left and right on the board, but that whole side of the board, or maybe the whole draft in general, right? So I think that's another thing that you have to be prepared for, and that could happen in the main event tonight too. We've talked about team construction a lot, Ryan. How flexible are you as you move throughout the draft of like when I'm drafting? I don't do a whole lot of best ball. I do mostly managed leagues, and I will have a template. I'll have a skeleton of like, okay, I kind of like this many quarterbacks, this many running backs, this many receivers, this many tight ends, so on and so forth, right? But I will adjust that based on how the draft is going. Do you have a magic number of a certain number of positions that you want to have, or is literally every draft different because of how you start off with building it?
I'd say both points are true. For instance, like if we take Justin Herbert tonight, I'm not going to take, I have no interest in taking another quarterback. We'll just ride with Justin Herbert. If we take Patrick Mahomes, same deal. But if we take Daniel Jones, for instance, maybe we add Dak Prescott or Kirk Cousins or Geno Smith or someone else in that range. Maybe we even hold Kyler Murray until the end of the year. So the answer to that would be not more than 2 in a managed league unless it's super flexed. And in a lot of scenarios, 1, where, similarly, I've drafted robust running back teams, but like that's not exactly what I'm targeting. But if that's the way the draft unfolds, like I'll do it. I let the draft come to me. And then in general, I want to fill the flex with wide receivers, ideally. But again, I'm not going to force it. And if I do that and say like we start with 4 wide receivers tonight, which we're maniacs, we might do that. We're going to take a ton of volume at running back that we normally wouldn't if, say, like we start with McCaffrey and, Derrick Henry. It's going to be two different things. So, yes, I do have a framework structure, but a framework for different kind of situations, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. When you look at all the different draft philosophies and draft tactics you can do, anchor RB, robust RB, zero RB, hero RB, bully tight end is another one, zero wide receiver, which I guess is kind of robust running back, but not necessarily. Is there a construction strategy that you think has more merit to it than others in the FFPC main event? Or does a lot of this kind of depend upon draft slot?
Yeah, it does depend on draft slot. Again, like I like Bijan Robinson. I'm not going to take him at 1.04. I'm not going to force anything like that. In general, and in this format too, I tend to lean towards zero running back or hero running back. I either want 3 wide receivers through 3 rounds or 2 wide receivers and 1 running back in the overwhelming majority of situations. Bully tight end is something that, like, say if I draft 500 best ball drafts on other platforms that aren't tight end premium, I might have 5 bully tight end teams. But on this platform, I might have 50 out of that group, So I think there's some merit to that, enhanced merit to that on the FFPC. Again, I don't like forcing taking tight ends early, but you got whatever comes to you, and it's a mixture for me of like value drafting and like getting your guys and being, assertive with your own player stances.
Talking about tight ends here, I've had more than a few players, high stakes players and industry people alike, tell me that this is the year for the tight end 3. That there are so many good sleeper tight ends available that obviously not all of them are going to pan out, but there's so many interesting ones late. Number one, do you feel the same way, especially in the FFPC tight end premium scoring? Do you feel the same way as they do? And then number 2, if you do, who are a few of those tight ends that you like late more so than the other tight ends going around them?
Yeah, I like that. In general, I prefer to operate in that way. But yes, there's a ton of them I like this year. I think Trey McBride is interesting upside. I wouldn't say Juwan Johnson's going late quite at this point, but I'm heavy on him. Tyler Conklin's been my guy this whole process. I think his skill set actually fits pretty well here. He gets Aaron Rodgers now. He's been pretty consistent. So I don't know where he's going exactly. I'll find out tonight.
I can tell you right now, Tyler Conklin in the FFPC main event has an ADP of he's tight end 26, and he's going at 1606 right now.
Yeah, there's a really good chance that I'll be the proud recipient of Tyler Conklin this evening. Jake Ferguson's pretty interesting too. I regret not taking more of him earlier, but I'm willing to buy the premium on him now. So I'm good with having 2 of those guys. Plus, if I can get a Freiermuth at a reasonable cost or Higbee or Kincaid, wonderful. But I'm good with operating with 2 or 3 of those guys and seeing what happens.
What do you like about McBride specifically on the Cardinals this year?
Until Kyler Murray comes back, there's probably some chance that they don't bring him back. Say if they're 0-10, like, why are you bringing Kyler Murray back? If he's dicey. A bad quarterback's best friend is a tight end. Zach Ertz is still there, so that's problematic potentially. But McBride's a Mackey Award winner. He was a 2nd-round pick last year. Colt McCoy and Clayton Tune aren't exactly, high upside players. I don't think, I could see Trey McBride having games where he has 6 catches for 40 yards. And, in tight end premium, that can be pretty good if you're loaded everywhere else. So that's kind of how I see him. And then in week 17, I know they play the Eagles, where they're probably going to be playing from behind. And again, not so much checkdowns, but like 5-yard little sit downs to Trey McBride. I could see that being a valuable thing this year.
The other thing I want to bring up here, and I'm saving the most important thing for last, besides individual player evaluation, which you have done an excellent job describing of why you like certain players, why you don't like certain players tonight. What's the one thing, in your opinion, that FFPC drafters have to get right in the main event, that they absolutely have to nail in the Fantasy Pros Championship to win either one of those $1 million grand prizes this year?
I mean, that's a great question. I'd start with roster construction while being very aware that floor doesn't matter nearly as much as game-breaking upside, especially during the playoff weeks. Like, granted, you want to build a foundation of having a high-scoring team because that actually helps you in your guys' format. But guys like Cole Beasley is like a fringe player, but the Cole Beasley sorts where they have 6 catches for 60 yards at wide receiver, you don't really want those guys in this. You want to take like you said, injury away running backs, those guys that can win you leagues. Just be aware that you're playing against an enormous field of people where you got to get through 11 first, or I think 2 teams advance, and then at the end, you got to be some of the best teams out there, and you want to be unique a little bit too.
I always liken it to hitting, right? Baseball hitting in a main event draft, where you as you come up as a hitter, one of the easiest things to do is just holding the bat out and letting it hit it and bunting, right?
Yeah.
And that's maybe your early round picks. Then as you get a little bit deeper after the first few picks, you start swinging for singles and then maybe doubles before you get to like round 6, 7, 8, and then you're swinging for doubles. But as the draft goes on, your swing gets bigger and it gets longer. And then by the end of it, except for your kicker and defense, you're swinging for home runs. Like because it almost is a detriment to take the guys that you just said, Cole Beasley, 6 for 60. They're roster cloggers. You need to get guys on your roster that are either going to hit big time or you can cut them right away for the next guy that could hit big time. So that's a great point there. So much great stuff from you tonight, Ryan. Where can everybody consume more Ryan Reynolds content? What's the best place to send them to?
I do a tremendous amount of content at the 33rdteam.com. We tweet it all out from the company handle, Ryan Reynolds NFL. You can find it all there too. And every Tuesday I'll have awards market content for established to run subscribers.
Which is fantastic. What about podcasting streams?
Josh and I do shows on Monday and Thursday. We talk about fantasy and betting. We'll have a waiver wire show on Tuesdays. And we will also do the player prop happy hour again with me, Josh, and Ben Wolby, where we'll discuss player props for single games. He's
doing it all. He's doing it all except for you will not see him on Welcome to Wrexham. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. That's not what he does. Not going to be in the next Deadpool movie either. Well, you never know. Maybe make a cameo. That'd be fantastic. We are back. That's going to wrap up our show, by the way, this week. We're going to be back at 7, 6 Central next week. Guest TBD. I'm working on it right now, but I know it's going to be a big one that we'll have on to get you set for sort of that final stretch of drafting before we get going on the season. MyFFPC.com is where to go to win a $1 million grand prize in the FFPC main event, as well as the Fantasy Pros Championship. Again, 2 separate grand prizes there that are worth $1 million each. The best ball tournament, the Superflex best ball tournament going on there. Dynasty leagues, we've never had one fold over 10 years. 1,500 plus leagues. Make sure you're checking that out. And if you just want to play in a closed 12-team league, please do so. You get $5. You're going to be able to play in a closed 12-team league of your choosing. Classic, Terminator, varsity, best ball, whatever you want to do there. Thank you so much, Ryan Reynolds, and we will continue to follow you on Twitter at Ryan Reynolds NFL, and go win that $1 million in the main event tonight.
Sure, I'm going to try, man.
That's awesome, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Dynasty Nerds with Garrett Price is right up next. Don't go anywhere. They're going to take things over here on the Better Sports Network.